Welcome, everyone, to year 3 of Pfalzgraf's Empire State Entrepreneurs and New York Business Law podcast, a really fun and informative forum for us to showcase some of our clients, strategic partners, friends, and community leaders to talk about relevant issues for entrepreneurs and business owners throughout New York. By now, of course, you know that I'm David Pfalzgraf, and I'm very blessed to be the managing partner at a local law firm called Pfalzgraf, and our DNA is that we fashion ourselves and believe us to be as entrepreneurial as any law firm and any lawyers could be, and we're really, really excited to welcome guests who are in this space and who are doing wonderful things, both from a business perspective, but also from a community perspective. And before I get to our great guests today and introduce them, I do want to thank Eric and Mike and all of our buddies here at Incept for allowing us to host these podcasts in the super cool studio that we find ourselves in today, right in downtown Buffalo. They've been a great, great partner for my law firm over the years, and we're looking to build on that relationship that we have with Incept. So thanks, Eric, for your time here today. With that, I got Nick Barone, Dan Magnuszewski. Eric, you'll make me sound good. And I've got Nick Barone and Dan Magnuszewski.
You're so worried about his name.
Because I had practiced yours. Dan, here with me today, two guys who are doing just a ton for the startup community, the tech ecosystem that they're helping to build out. I've been looking forward to this one for a while, and I know they're both busy, so I'm really, really appreciative of you taking time out of your days to be with me here today on this podcast. And we're going to get all into the tech ecosystem and all the things you're doing at Radial Ventures and with the foundation, the 43 North Foundation. But before we do so, I think our listeners are fortunate to have an opportunity to hear about both your backgrounds and sort of what has led you here today. So I think I'll start with Nick. And I know a little bit about your background and about your better half and all that good stuff, Nick, but give our listeners a sense of sort of, where you grew up and a little bit about your early education before sort of being here today with me and Dan.
So I was born in Syracuse, New York, but born to a Buffalo family that happened to just move back. So really I'm a Buffalonian at heart. And I grew up here. We moved when I was really young. So I grew up in Orchard Park. I went to Canisius High School. And
we'll forgive you for that. That's okay.
No one's perfect.
Great school.
But and then also went to Canisius College, which is where I met my wife, and studied the digital media arts. So I was one of the first 4-year graduates in a new program in 2006. For digital media, which centered around web design and graphic design, video production, but really sort of like new stuff that was happening. And upon graduation, in like 2005, 2006, I started reading TechCrunch, Yahoo blog at the time. And Flickr had sold to Yahoo for $20 million. Which was a huge sum of money, right? But like that gave me this like bug in startups. So I looked for startup companies here. There was really one, Synacor, which I didn't go work at. Dan can talk a little bit about that. I picked a different one, Hyperlocal Media. But I essentially like looked for opportunities in small startups, wanted to learn how to run a business, grow a startup, that sort of thing. So that was really like that like through line for me. And before that, as a kid, I was a computer nerd, played with computers and stuff my whole life.
But before I turn it to Dan, so you timeline wise, but you graduate from college in 2006, and you go out on your own, sort of thinking about the startup world, or you join a company right out of college?
So I joined a company. That company was Hyperlocal Media, which was the parent company of Buffalo Rising.
Okay.
So at
Newell
the time,
Nussbaumers.
Newell is Newell and George. So at the time,
and George, that's right.
We had raised angel round for Barry Hennigan, which is where I actually met you.
That's right. That's right. I forgot Barry
you were
introduced
our
us.
lawyer, actually. You represented us in small claims. If you really want a story.
That was right. Humble beginnings for both of us.
That was a long time. Long time. But yeah, we that company, it didn't work out. And then I went and worked for a company in Silicon Valley. But from here, so I got to telecommute and have the best of both worlds. And then at that point is so that was like 2009 when I went on my own. And really there is where I was working at home, doing stuff, mainly building websites, but there was this need to see what else was out there and what people were doing. So we started to find a group on Twitter mainly at the time. And that became a group of us kind of meeting at coffee shops, talking about companies, building startups. And I think that was at that point in time, that was a new era of grassroots startup creation that just wasn't as formalized in Buffalo. And those tools, again, those early social media platforms made it possible for us to then meet in real life, talk about doing stuff. And then, quickly thereafter, we're sitting at Steve's house building my favorite, an office is doing
among
stuff.
other things.
Among other, yeah. So
off to the races.
Really fun, but yeah, really, always on the edge of entrepreneurial things and trying to do stuff that there's no parachute. You got to just figure it out. But yeah, that was really where.
And I do want to explore this open coffee club and whether that sort of environment whether we could duplicate that again, and whether you're doing some of that through Radial Ventures today or not. But before we get to that, Dan, same sort of questions around your upbringing and sort of initial roots and ties to Buffalo and Western New York.
Sure. Yeah. So similar story, but born in a different city, a place called Florida, New York, but to Buffalo parents. And so I was born down there, moved back to Buffalo. I think it was around first, second grade. Moved back and spent some time at Kenmore, and then eventually ended up in Sweet Home and went to Sweet Home High School. Graduated from there in 2001, and this was like a interesting peak time .com bubble. Still hadn't blown up yet while I was still in school. All these new web design classes were coming out. I took this thing called Cisco Network Academy while I was in high school. And so was always interested in computers and stuff like that. And went to UB for computer science. That was around that was right after the .com bubble exploded. And it was a really interesting time where everything, all the jobs were gone, bubble popped. We're outsourcing everything to India. There's not going to be any jobs. And there was maybe 300 of us who were, 300 of us, I think they're in the program that's now 4,500 people or something like that. So it was kind of this huge dip of, everything .com, nothing, technology is no longer as sexy of a thing. So that was an interesting, but fortunately out of high school, I was able to get my Cisco certification and weaseled my way through a lot of interesting, backdoor ways of finding people's number at M&T. And we had heard that there was an internship program in their network operations center. And so was able to do some maneuvering and got an internship out of high school that I worked that summer. And then they kept me on during school. So it was interesting because I felt like I already had a job and I was all set. And so went through school, but still always wanted to start my own companies. And, in college, the Paul Graham essays were just coming out. So we were reading those. One of our current partners now, Mike Canzaneri, we were buddies and we met in college. We were buddies in college, and we would go into classrooms and write different on a chalkboard, different startup ideas and try to figure out which ones make sense. So there was always kind of a path, but it was okay, well, I have this job. And so I did that for a couple of years out of school.
This is 05, 06, 07.
Yeah, so I graduated 05, so 07. Was looking around for something else. And
you're at M&T.
I'm at M&T, big company. You got to dress up to go to work. You got to get there early. These are things that
good lessons.
Yeah, these are things that I'm not, the greatest at. And there was this local. I had known a bunch of guys from the tech community that we had established through the University of Buffalo about this company called Synacor, and so they were, raising capital. They were really, the first that was really taking off, and ended up going there for a while. I was there for probably a little under 4 years. And so it was one of those phases where I think it was around like the 100th employee at that time. And I was there and watched them kind of grow and scale to, I think it was maybe 350 people by the time we left. And again, it was an interesting time. We were coming in, they're like, we're getting ready to IPO. This was like, when it came out in 2007. And so you had Bear Stearns in there doing all the underwriting, and all right, I'm like, wow, this is going to be great. I'm like, just join this company. We're going to go public. I got all this equity. It's going to be awesome. And then 2008 happened. All of it went away, including Bear Stearns. And so it was an interesting experience and kind of going through, kind of the macro environments. But for me, it was kind of that first look at like scaling companies and, what to do, what not to do, what works.
Remind me what Synacor, what was their core business?
So they had a couple different businesses. So they started out doing like email, like Budweiser.com email, or you can choose your own. They had a bunch of different domains. So it was really like how it started in the late 90s, and it was really like, there's email. How can we allow people to have their own email or have their own email at their own domains? And so it was kind of this consumer, but they also did a bunch of like Major League Baseball's email and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it was email, and then it got into portals for like Charter Communications, Cox, like a whole bunch of these other big telecom companies. And that would be your portal. I think maybe they had Adelphia.com back in the day.
Sure.
And you would go in, you have your email, you got all your widgets, what the temperature, you got, all your news, and you could customize it, right? And so that was a really novel thing, right? Back in those days. So that was the core of, a lot of what they did.
And you stay at Synacor for around 4 years.
Yep.
And then from there.
Yeah. So from there it was, I'm like, all right, it was one day I was working the second shift, and I've told the story a bunch of times, but there was all these sailboats. We were right on the waterfront there. And I see all these sailboats going out. It's like a beautiful night. And I'm like, if I stay here, will I end up being able to get a yacht? And I was like, oh, no. So I'm like, all right, maybe it's time.
No chance.
It's a very pragmatic answer.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
The answer was no. So it was like, okay, it became time to kind of, start looking around, and kind of while I was still at Synacor, this was around 2010, is when these open coffee clubs started. We were having other events in kind of 2009 called Bar Camp, where people would do talks and brought a bunch of people together. And so this is when we met Steve Poland and, my other buddy, Mike Canzaneri, who I mentioned. We went out to Boulder Startup Week in 2010. And so, we got to experience, like, here's what Boulder's doing. And they had tours, and we were meeting with all these different startup founders and these different companies and seeing what people were doing. And then looking at Boulder was interesting because at that time it was very much like, this was even, people weren't even as much saying you got to go to New York City. It was more like, you got to go to Silicon Valley if you want to do this, right? And Boulder's, kind of view was, well, that's bullshit. Like, you want to go to Silicon Valley? Go. I don't give a shit. Like,
right, we don't care.
We're not Silicon Valley. And it was a refreshing look of, a town or city of 125,000 people or 130,000 people, whatever it is. Like, this place is smaller than Buffalo, and they have, like, I don't give a fuck attitude. I don't know if I can swear.
No, you can. You're fine.
But that was basically
kids listen to
a lot of kids. Yeah. We'll clean it up for the high school kids. But like that was their view, and it was just like, we don't care, and if you want to go do that, that's fine. We're going to do us. And they had a great, they have a great thriving ecosystem with a lot of activity. So I kind of like that rebel view of, we don't need to go do what everyone tells us to do. So that was really refreshing, bringing that back. Came back to Buffalo, and it's like, okay, we can, we have more people. We have there's some of these open coffee club things going on. We started getting some momentum. And so it's like, this is possible in Buffalo. And so left Cinecor and started joined a company called My Favorites with Steve Poland. We worked on that for about 6 months. We went to South by Southwest trying to raise funding, tracking down Ashton Kutcher and whoever the other.
We didn't actually track him down.
We were at a bar at a Hitmonk party, and he showed up, but then he just scurried away. To me more.
Us, and Steve didn't get a pitch him at all.
Yeah. So
that didn't work.
Great party. It was a great party.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
It was a great weekend. But it was an interesting time, and it was kind of early social media. Mobile was now becoming a thing, and so early stage of mobile. And so there was just a lot of activity, a lot of excitement, a lot of people trying to figure it out. So we did that for a while. That ended up closing down. And then I was just kind of working as a, freelancer, technical co-founder for hire. Partnered up with another local startup that Nick and I were at called Dooley. Yeah. So we did that for about a year. And then at the same time, I'm traveling around to different cities and upstate, trying to connect the upstate market from a startup tech perspective and let people in Syracuse know, hey, here's what's going on in Buffalo. And
sure.
So I was doing a lot of this type of stuff. And Z80 Labs, I got word that Z80 Labs was going to be this new incubator. They had $5 million in seed funding. And there was a lot of the stuff I was trying to get involved with, and how do we get more of in Buffalo. And so that was a good opportunity, and met with Jordy Levy, Ron Schreiber, and they hired me on to go get it off the ground and run it.
What year was that?
2012.
2012 that Z80 gets sort of launched, and you have an active role then, a sort of a full-time role at Z80.
Yep. Yeah, and the goal there, so that was a big shift from doing software engineering work to kind of VC / community development, economic development kind of work. And it was great. So, that was kind of my MBA in starting companies.
100%.
And, having those guys and, people like Eric Reich and others who were on the board, it was a great learning experience. And I saw how they look at companies, how they dissect them, what they're looking for in pitches, and you start kind of learning a lot of that. So for me, that was huge. And so did that for a while. We brought in a ton of, the biggest VCs in the world came to Buffalo, and we're doing talks and meeting with their companies. But I still like building companies and building product. And
you still had that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
That this is great that I'm sort of involved in all this, but ultimately I want to do this.
Yeah,
I want to be the one.
Yeah, it's do you want to be the coach and the mentor and the this and that, or do you want to get on the field and get dirty?
It was also validation. Z80 and then 43 North after was validation for all this work we had done before.
And remind me, Nick, when you guys met, when do you remember first meeting?
In 2010, probably at Bar Camp, or 2009.
And Bar Camp was a similar open coffee club.
Yeah, but it would have speakers. It was at night.
Anyone could sign up, and
we go to Pearl Street and people would give a talk on Pearl or design concepts.
Who were the originators of?
Steve Poland is really
that's funny
line for everything. He wanted to have this stuff happen, and then as more people got in the orbit, it got just worked out better. But then Z80 was that validation point of there's actually real money and real VCs that actually are from Buffalo and have all this experience that have now are trying to build something here too. That's not just us, clicking away trying to make it happen.
Did you have a role at a formal role at Z80?
So I stayed at Dooley.
Okay.
And I worked there for another couple months.
What was Dooley doing again?
A lot of stuff. Dooley it's basically Airtable. So it was a database in the cloud. At the time, you could just build a database and share it with people. And it was we learned a lot. We learned a lot of what not to do, but we learned a lot of good things too. Founder had gone to school in Buffalo, was in New York City, team was here. So it was a lot of interesting stuff. It just, these things are hard and they don't work. And There's various reasons, but a lot of the alumni from that ended up then going to ACV and other places as well. Like that's the other thing you realize as you go and meet, and like Steve is almost that godfather that created a lot of that network, is that you meet more people and they are going to go build something, or they might work and be like that linchpin that makes part of what you do successful. So there's just a ton of that networking that was really valuable and really, like, I think helped spur on what was happening beyond just capital, because all the money in the world isn't good if you can't actually build and execute.
Yeah. And that was the thing. Z80's goal was, we need a place for people who don't want to go to New York City, don't want to go to Silicon Valley, and want to build a high growth company. Like, we were that spot. And, I think, there's definitely instances that people came back to Buffalo and like, oh, I was looking to come back and I see this here, like, that's interesting. There was other people who were like, we may have to, like everyone says, we have to go to New York or whatever. Maybe we got to move. And it was like, oh, we now have this thing here that's, equivalent to, wherever else you'd go. And we're bringing in all the VCs you can't, from New York that you wouldn't be able to get in front of in New York. We can bring them to Buffalo and you can have some quality time with them. So.
In early on, Z80, yourself, Dan, you're still at Dooley, Nick, but at Poland, you've got support from Ron and Jordy. You've got Eric and sort of a nascent board that they're starting to build out. For the couple years that you were formerly at Z80, you learn a ton about how to evaluate, sort of challenges or opportunities with startups, and what you like, what you don't like. If you're going to do it yourself, how you would do it, and then what's the catalyst? What's the springboard? And when do you say, "The hell with I'm going"?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just, like I said, it was more a lot of mentoring, a lot of, it wasn't a lot of like actual doing. It was more like, let's build this like environment that people can come in and build companies, but. At the core of it, it's, and a lot of times if you're advising, it's like, you should go do this or do this within this amount of time or have this urgency, and then you come back and they may be in the same spot. So for me, it's more just like, it was time to get back into it, and so I looked at a couple other opportunities, was talking to some other founders, and that's when Joe Neiman applied to the incubator. So he applied to Z80 and
called on the phone, right?
He called on the phone. I think he submitted and then he called, and they're like, we have a call. I'm like, oh, what kind of weirdo calls, right?
Called on the phone, right?
A car dealer.
I'm not going to.
Our car dealers on line one.
Used car dealers are going to call you. So, so he applied, and we kind of, I met with him, kind of walked him through the normal like intro meeting, and basically, and my dad has a background in, he's, smaller used car dealer, used to go to the auction. So I actually had a pretty decent understanding of the market and opportunity there, and went through it. And I was like, I think I can build this. And, this seems interesting. And so we kind of started that in the summer of 2014. And, so from there, it was kind of nights and weekends trying to figure it out. Started building the product, and that's when Nick and Jonathan started Helm, and so we brought them on for doing a lot of the design work and things like that. And then it was I think it was probably around Thanksgiving of 2014. Went to Jordy and was just like, all right, I have this idea, like I'm working on, like I'm gonna go do it. And so from there, that was January 1st. We kind of went through and we're all in on it, and sold our house. We had a nice house. Synacor had IPO'd at that point, so I had a little bit. So
1,000 there.
Yeah, 1,000 there, which was better than a negative air. So, but yeah, so I had this nice house. I had a 1-year-old, was married, and
crazy.
I told my wife, like, I think we have to sell the house because I'm not going to have any income. And so we did that, and we were kind of off to the races with ACV. I had known Jack Greco through my Z80 time, and he was coming into town, and what are you working on? What's going on? I told him about that and brought him on, and that was really like the three of us, kind of all legs of the stool in terms of capabilities and what we were doing. And was off to the races, trying to raise, we're trying to raise $1 million round in Buffalo, and, late 2014,
not
2015.
Easy. Not easy.
Not easy. And obviously Z80 put money in, but really our first investor was Ashok Subramanian, who had started Liaison.
Sure. Yep.
And so I had known him, and we were talking because he was trying to, different sponsor events in the community and stuff. And so he was one of my first calls, and pitched him. And, I think we were originally only trying to raise $250K, and he looked at the performa and all that. He's like, you're gonna need more money. It's like, you need to raise, and first meeting, he was like, I'll give you $50K, right? Whatever, just send me the stuff. Then he's like, you're going to need to raise $1 million, but I'll put 200 or whatever it was.
Right,
and I'm like,
right.
Okay, I guess we're raising $1 million. And so from there, it was definitely an interesting experience in that, like, going through raising the capital, building the product, building out demand, all that stuff. So
what year was it then that you won 43 North?
So that would have been October of 2015. So we launched, we kind of went full in on it January 1st of 15.
Sure.
We launched June 1st of 2015. And then 43 North was probably October 30th or something. Yeah. End of October.
And that gave you some capital, but it also gave you some good press and PR to capitalize on. And
it was a good, so we had raised $1 million. We had proved out the Buffalo market. We had started going in the Albany market to show we can go into take ACV into other markets. And so at that point, it was kind of working, and it was really, how do we get cash in there to help speed up, how many markets we can open at a time and how quickly we could grow. And so, the 43 North was great because that was $1 million. Had some national, like, media things that went out, but a lot of the local stuff as well. It was kind of this, validation stamp that, even though we were, like, just some kids, like, trying to, go disrupt automotive market. So that was great as well.
And you ended up ringing the bell, or when did the IPO?
March of 21.
So a pretty quick.
It's pretty fast.
Yeah, 5 or 6 year stretch there.
Yeah, it was. I mean, ACV days. I mean, we were growing 350% year over year for however many years, right? And so that was another, where I'd learned a bunch on Cinecore from the, the kind of the 100-person company to 350-person company. ACV was, from 3 people to over 2,000 people, right? And how do you, I think we were hiring. The one year we hired like 60 engineers and stuff like that. So, then becomes different problems of, like, how do you onboard? How do you, like, train? How are you, like, finding the right talent? How are you, assimilating them in? How are you structuring your teams? Because you have to then structure your technology and your teams in a certain way so that you can add more people and go faster. Because what normally happens is you add more people, and then there's a point where you start going slower. Right. And so you have to make these shifts. And, we were growing and expanding so fast that it was very, like, what would normally take a lot longer of a time. We had it very condensed in terms of org structures and tech, and product and all these other things that we were dealing with. So it was fun. It was a very condensed, growth
point in time in
phase.
your life, I'm sure. And 6 years must have seemed like, right.
Yeah. It's like, it was quick, but actually it kind of felt long, but I guess it's not that bad.
It's a remarkable story. I mean, you both should be extraordinarily proud of how you had an impact on really transforming a community, and so many people were fortunate to have been a part of that ride. And it just, in my memory of practicing law in Buffalo and building my own little scrappy little law firm, it gives you energy when you know that this stuff can happen, and that dreams can become realities. And I look back at ACV, and it's remarkable and such a great story to tell, and been so looking forward to having you here, Dan. Tell me, how come like the 10 years from 2015, or call it 10, 11 years of 43 North, and obviously Colleen's doing an amazing job and looking for great things still coming out of 43 North and the foundation that we'll get to in a minute. But there hasn't been another ACV at least yet. And will there be, could there be, what can we do as a community or as entrepreneurs or business leaders or investors or anything else? Like, what can we do? I want more ACV stories.
Well, we all do, yeah. And that's...
can we get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that dovetails into, what we're doing with the 43 North Foundation and with Radial Ventures. But, I think at a high level... there are companies that are, in the 43 North portfolio that, are on a great path. And, they may get there. I think the macro, kind of the zero interest rate market and all the other stuff from the economy is, really shifted. And so there's a lot more headwinds out there than there used to be. So, I think that's going to delay some of these companies, what, maybe we were able to do in 7 years or 6 years, it may take now 10 plus years, depending on how things go.
Normal.
Right. Yes. Yes.
That was actually very fast. There's a lot going on.
Right.
COVID also kind of happened during that time.
Yeah. COVID. Yeah. COVID
which was bad and really helpful in terms of stock market.
Yeah.
Everything
So,
was available.
And maybe that's a good segue to I know most of our listeners, Dan and Nick, know the shit ton about 43 North, and it's been great for Buffalo and Western New York, and really put us on the map, I think, in part because of success stories like ACV. But I don't think a lot of our listeners know a lot about the foundation, or certainly now this Radial Ventures, which is super cool, I think. So can you guys give us a sense of sort of the work that the foundation's doing? I know John Gavigan, who's been a guest, is now running headstrong in the foundation, and then how Radial Ventures sort of ties into the work that the foundation is doing.
Sure. Yeah. So the 43 North Foundation is separate from the competition, right? And I think that's a big thing to kind of lay out. And so the foundation itself was created through economic windfalls from ACV and a bunch of the other 43 North companies that have had exits, and we established a foundation whose goal is really, how do we help continue to drive startup technology sector here in Western New York, and help be able to build the talent. So one of the pillars is talent. How are we funding and helping develop talent even at the earliest ages of elementary school and through the different years, the folks, so Eric Reich, Bill Maggio, Sarah Tambaguchi, and others were involved doing a lot of research into other cities and seeing what they did. The Indianapolises, the Pittsburgh, Salt Lake City, people who we look to as aspirational peers, and said, what did they do right? And so they looked at a ton of these cities and found that there's a consistent theme across them, right? So one of them is talent. They have programs, K through adult, right, where you're going out there, you're identifying talent. There's programs to help accelerate those who are inclined or advanced or moving along. But how do you give more people that training and not rely on state government or school district or other funding? Like, this is something that's so important that if we're going to try to create companies and jobs, we need people that can fill those jobs, right? So that's one of the big pillars, and we're working with Tech Buffalo on that. Then there's another around corporate connectivity, and that's what John Gavigan's leading, and it's really around historically, and really how we've been doing it it's less like we're working with the established business community to move things forward. It's more like, screw it, we're just going to go do it and build this stuff up, and whoever tags along, but that wasn't really a focus. So it's really more about how do we work, how do the kind of startup ecosystem work well with established corporates, right? And other cities do this really well in terms of, being design partners or first customers or just advising or helping, just helping in a variety of different ways, just support in general. that was a piece that was lacking. And so we have a pillar that's really focused on accomplishing that.
That's a good way that the community, like the corporate community, can help startups, is being that, especially like a first customer. And that's often a challenge, right?
Right. And I'm sure historically it was a tremendous challenge as you guys were building out ACV and that lack of awareness piece, the lack of engagement piece from the business community
The early dealerships helped, right? Like that actually worked out there. But I think if you look at other ones where there's like a B2B thing or whatever, and just the local companies are just it's too risky. There's 3 kids or whatever.
Hard,
really,
and there was some that
chance on it.
There was, and we had some dealerships that were the reason we survived, and then others who didn't give us the time of day, right? And so, which is interesting as it kind of grew, and then they're like, "Oh, you weren't involved. Okay, you missed it. You could have invested." But anyway, so then we have another pillar around storytelling, right? And so the other piece is, how do you have a consistent drumbeat of information on the tech community, the startup community, kind of the ecosystem in general, and be able to build a brand around Buffalo where, you go out and target expats and local people, and, you have your different customer segments like you would if you're starting a company and trying to market to your customers. What we're trying to do that in addition to, building out the content. So we've basically built up a newsroom, led by Dan Miner, and who knows everyone, and has been really reporting on this stuff since I think he came on just as Z80 Labs was getting off the ground. So like he's been reporting on it, he's been in it, he knows the players, he knows the history, and so now it's a way to turbocharge that that marketing message and have a bigger microphone to really keep people who. A ton of people who've moved away, and they're always like, I'm wondering how I can get involved and help in Buffalo. What's going on, right? That's always the questions. Like, so now what if they come to Buffalo for a Bills game, or they're doing whatever, or visiting family, and they already know what's going on. And they're like, I need to go talk to this person and this person when I'm in because I'm reading about all this stuff they're doing. Like that's a huge piece that we think, it's important, and it's something that's been lacking.
I couldn't agree more. I think that storytelling piece is equally as important to some of the outreach to corporate community and talent, and that tying it all together and being able to package that so someone when they are when you do pique their interest sort of knows more, or is more information and more ability to reach out to you or to you and make those connections. So the storytelling piece is critically important.
And it's brand building, right? And so what's the brand of Buffalo, right? And so that's another piece we look like. What is that brand? And so if we want to attract companies here, we want to attract talent here, we want people to stay here, how do you build that brand so it's sexy and people say yes to it, So that's the storytelling piece. And then the final pillar is Venture Studio, right? So that's Radial Ventures. And really the thought there is, how do we get more ACVs, right? And so, 43 North competition, that model is how do we, fund local or companies outside the area, bring them to Buffalo, have them live here, work here, get involved in the community with the, the hopes that they'll stay and create new jobs and be successful. Radial Ventures is taking a different, in venture studios in general, and I'll break down the venture studio model, but essentially our goal is to build a team that has experience building, scaling, exiting companies, and put them in an environment where we can take ideas and go and build companies and build them faster and de-risk them, get them in the market, and generate more companies. So it's less of we're waiting for someone to accidentally meet at a coffee thing and those are the right 2 people with the right idea at the right time, and then they were able to figure out all the other stuff. We really know the playbook on, what needs to happen in what amount of time, the urgency. We have great networks now. And so how can we leverage that to increase the amount of startups that we create, but also de-risking them at that time so that they have a higher rate of success. And the venture studio model is that, right? It's a company that creates new companies. And, looking at the data. If you look at venture capital, which is just here's money, we're going to put money into these companies and maybe advise. What we're doing is really a hands-on approach where, we're funding a team. We're not doing direct capital investment, but we have a dedicated team that we can put towards these ideas to build the product, do design, understand, go to market, take it to market, recruiting. So we do all these aspects to where
it's incredible.
We work it through this process, and then we have something that is investable. We go raise capital, build out the rest. We may need to build out the rest of the management team, and then that company spins out onto its own. If people from the studio want to continue on, they can do that. If they want to fall back and go work on the next idea, they can do that.
It's different than a Z80 approach. Right. This is sort of like a modern day Z80 or
yeah, for sure. And it was stuff that I've running an incubator. It's interesting because you got to find people who are already doing companies, bring them in. They need to kind of do the work themselves, and so and then they're trying to get funding and they're trying to build a product, but they don't have enough money to hire someone to go build it. Right. And so you're in this chicken and egg thing.
Right.
And and we dealt with that at Z80, and that was a big frustration of mine. And so, more and more the venture studio model is kind of coming where it's a nice combination of venture capital, incubator, accelerator, but with people who can, build, scale, and, spin out these companies.
For an entrepreneur listener who has a great idea, how do we get to Radial Ventures? Or is there we'll make an intro or call me and I'll call Dan and we'll be off to the races. But how are you sourcing prospects and onboarding potential entrepreneurs to work with?
Yeah, so our website, we have an apply, so radialventures.com/apply. We have a quick form that we have them fill out from the idea, and then depending on the idea and if it seems like something that's in our wheelhouse, we'll meet with the founder, we'll talk through the idea, and that's kind of how we're looking at running that process. And
is it a offshoot of the 43 North Foundation, or is Radial Ventures sort of its own entity, its own?
It's essentially its own entity underneath the umbrella of 43 North Foundation. So our funding comes from the 43 North Foundation, with the goal that we can build companies, we have successful exits, we're able to fund it and really grow it more, right? So these are venture studios are very deliberate efforts to go and build companies, right? And so if we can build that factory, it becomes a new way of, a new form of economic development here in Buffalo, because we're all here, we're all in office, we're,
really
cranking away. And, if we can, fill a couple buildings with successful companies,
it's really exciting.
That's the goal.
Do you, and that's how, Dan, today you're spending most of your time is engaged with Radial Ventures. And Nick, you're still...
I'm full-time at Radial.
You're full-time at Radial too now. That's awesome. So there's a credible infrastructure and team now that you've built and assembled, and that's ready to be deployed to help out these entrepreneurs.
Like I said, you have to start these with people who have been in the trenches of, they have the scars, they've built multiple companies that have flamed out, did okay, did well, right? And so you learn a lot, over the past, 20 years or so. Like it's crazy it's that long, but you learn a lot, right? And I think we've done that, and so having that experience is like, okay, let's do this and then this, because if we don't, then these other 5 things down the road, like this is going to happen in 3 months, and then 6 months we're going to run into this other issue, which it removes a lot of the first time founder mistakes that happen. But at the same time, people who have ideas that, they may be working at a company and they're like, I have, 3 kids, a mortgage, a partner, and 2 car payments. I can't go and do this, but I have this great idea. The venture studio model is nice because they say, I have this idea. I'm the subject matter expert on it. I can't leave my job because of this, and this. Great. We'll work with you. We'll figure out what your role is. But you can keep your job, and we'll go build this company, and then maybe when that thing's up and running and rolling, now it may be a good time for you to make the jump and join the company, right? So there is like a training as well. It is a lot of people who've been there, done that, but it's also another way that we can, give some of these founders or people with idea that get involved, the education around building, scaling, growing companies.
What a great way, Dan and Nick, to sort of use that 20 years of experience, the School of Hard Knocks, but to pay it forward in such a meaningful way for an entrepreneur, just like you described, who's got a great idea, but a ton of impediments to success or challenges to success. You guys have seen what it takes then to take that idea and make it become reality. So I really am excited about seeing what sort of impact you guys can have with Radial. And I'll let you go in a minute, but just a couple last questions. One for you, Dan. Like, looking back, do you and Greco and Neiman ever reflect or hop on a call or a Teams and say, "Holy shit! I mean, that was crazy and that was fun," or look at the not just the great IPO and the outcome, but sort of the impact then that story has had on our community and how transformative those, that story has been for the ecosystem and entrepreneurs and people who are great ideas and dreamers. And like, looking back, the three of you ever say like, wow, that was crazy.
It's, yeah, I mean, I know I definitely think about it a lot, and I still talk to those guys. It is interesting to take a step back and look at it, and that's something I kind of learned going through that process, because it's very easy to like focus on certain issues or what's going on and just getting run down and burned out and new issues, and so yeah, I mean, I definitely take a step back once in a while, and it's like, glad that worked out. But yeah, I mean, back from the Open Coffee days to Z80, I mean, that was the goal, is like, how can we build a company that can grow and scale and have a big exit IPO? And, for me, that's kind of the full loop of checking all the boxes. And, so now we have a new checklist we have to go.
I hope you guys can figure out a way to repeat. And I guess on that note, what does success look like for you and for our community, say in 3 to 5 year time frame? You'll know that Radial had the impact that you're desiring it to have today if what happens in 3 to 5 years from now, more ACVs or more traction and energy in downtown Buffalo, or how do we sort of look into the future and think about what success would look like for you guys personally, or for Radial Ventures in general?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it is multifaceted. I mean, I think for Radial Ventures, if we're, I think success looks like, I would say a bunch of other companies that have achieved success similar to ACV. If we can get 3 to 5 more of those, that'd be great. But I also think having the amount of more startups, to where it is a more vibrant startup community. There's more companies being launched all the time. It's hard to keep track of all of those things. I think could be, great outcomes. I think if there's other people who have, been successful and had an exit and are now on their next thing, that success, so I think if we can get it to really build off of, the success of ACV, I think ACV was like, can we do that here? And then like, okay, we can do that here. Now it's, okay, can we do that a lot of times, right? And so that's really, this second phase of my career is really just around like, how do we help get Buffalo to that phase where, we're building companies, it's vibrant. Yeah, I think we got to do a ton to get people back in offices and back downtown. And I think there's a whole piece there. I think, working with UB and UB is such a huge anchor and area of talent attraction that comes into the area, and such, has so much impact economically that, building out UB and the relationships there and kind of that pipeline of students and talent that come in, like how do we take advantage of that, as opposed to people come here, get trained and go away, right? And so if we can catch that talent and be able to get that top talent that's coming here from all over the world, that's success as well.
It reminds me a little bit when Mike Whistler was a guest, and he was talking about that need for constant collaboration, and it's what you're doing, it's what UB is doing, it's what M&T is doing, and figuring out ways to break down traditional barriers or lack of collaboration. And I know, like, I feel good that with Whistler and Gavigan and you guys and others, that like we're for the first time in a long time, we have this opportunity in front of us. Like, we have potential as a community to really explode, but it's going to take the stuff that you're doing and others are doing. And
we got to do it together. And, I think maybe the old school way of silos and, well, this is my turf and this is my turf and we're the ones that do this. And I think all that just needs to go away. And it needs to be a no ego situation. And like, listen, we're here to, like, we all have the same goal. Like, let's work together and not try to duplicate each other's efforts and try to fight each other. Like, we need to work together because it's hard enough to do this if we all work together, let alone we all have pissing matches between each other.
It's a great point. It's a great point. Well, look, guys, I can't begin to thank you enough. You got a ton of stuff going on. I know I speak for many in our community when I say that our hopes, our expectations of Radial Ventures under your leadership are high, that we have a great possibility and a great potential to do something really cool, and I hope you're able to succeed because it's important for our community. So thanks for everything that you're doing, and look for many great outcomes for you in the months and years to come. So thanks again for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was great. I could have gone all day, actually.
Yeah.